All right. Welcome, welcome. All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and start it. My name is Kevin Dotson. This is the Icmcp Engage series. We are having today's event will be the resume writing best practices. A little bit about Icmcp. We are a foundational program designed to grow and develop and highlight careers, opportunities, and contributions of diverse talent within the cybersecurity space. So what we're looking to do, or the goal here, is to really push people, really invite people into the cybersecurity industry. And this actually event is not just for cybersecurity practitioners. This is for anyone and everyone who is looking for help in the area of COVID. We want to provide as much help as we can for resume writing, interviewing skills, and the like. What you'll see here is some of the topic areas that we intend to cover. Not today, but what the series will focus on, career areas like career development, career spotlight, transition, leadership, and tech talks. You'll also see that we do have several celebrations for this year. Throughout the year, there will be more to come as we continue to develop programming for everyone to be able to take advantage of. My name is Kevin Dotson. This is a little bit about myself. I am the chairman of the Icmcp Career Placement Committee. I am a compliance officer for a company called SaltTST, which is a DoD logistics and IT services vendor. I also am the director of community outreach for Holistic Information Security Practitioners Institute, and I'm the managing partner for BMOS Consulting, which is a cybersecurity assessment and remediation company. I do have a passion for cybersecurity, and I also have a passion for helping people to enter into the market or any other way that I can help. So that is why we are putting this on. Thank you for the input about May. One of our participants commented that May is the Jewish American Heritage Month, so we'll have to add that to our list there. We'll make a note of that. Thank you so much, Samantha. But this is a little bit about me. And our first panelist will be Win. Win, I'll allow you to talk about yourself. This is Win.
Hey everyone, thanks again for making the time to listen to us chat a little bit about resume writing best practices. As a really quick intro, I'm currently the consulting practice staffing. Our specialization is actually in the world of cybersecurity recruitment, which is obviously very relevant for a lot of people that are attending today. I've been in the recruiting world for 5 coming up on 6 years now, and previously worked at actually North America's largest IT staffing company, focused more on the network infrastructure and telecom side. Very similar to Kevin, I do have a really great passion for bringing people into the cyber world, as well as just helping people develop their careers. I think this is recruiting is one of the areas where we're really able to see that impact that we're having on people.
Awesome. Our next presenter is Tanisha, and I'll allow her to introduce herself. Tanisha Martin.
Hi, I'm Tanisha Martin. I'm the executive director and chairman of the board for Black Girls Hack. So similar to Kevin and Win, I also have an interest in getting people into cybersecurity, specifically trying to increase diversity within cybersecurity. I'm also the adjunct faculty for computer science and cybersecurity at Voorhees College and a senior principal consultant. And you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I look forward to helping you guys get your next career.
Awesome, thank you. Next, we have Jerry. Jerry will be our Q&A moderator, and I'll allow Jerry to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So my name is Jerry Zayas. I've been in cybersecurity for quite some time now. Obviously, definitely have a passion for it. That's why I'm here today, and I'm excited about all the people that are joining us today that are also interested in this industry, so to speak. Have worked in various roles throughout my career, from the manufacturing side, with companies Komodo and Nixon, and currently I'm working at a cybersecurity VAR called Access IT Group that specializes in cybersecurity and services as a cybersecurity consultant. So I'm very excited about today, and hopefully this helps everybody out who attends today.
Awesome. Thank you, Jerry, for that. We'll go ahead and jump right on in. Win.
Awesome. And then, yeah, just I know Kevin mentioned this earlier as well. If you guys do have any questions throughout the course of the presentation, please don't hesitate to throw it into the chat. Like Jerry said, he's going to be the Q&A moderator, so he's going to be keeping an eye on the questions that you guys have. And then there's going to be a time at the end where we'll be able to answer some of the questions. All right, so jumping right into it, the purpose of a resume, just because, you know, we're not sure exactly who the audience is, you know, there may be some people out there that are just looking to get into the job market. So as a really quick introduction, the purpose of a resume, first and foremost, is a personal introduction of you to, you know, a hiring manager. You know, the goal is to differentiate you from other candidates that may apply for the same roles. I think studies have shown on average, and this is pre-COVID numbers, so they may be a little bit different now, but there's about 80 resumes that are presented to, or that are a hiring manager will receive about 80 resumes per job posting. So what are you going to do to really differentiate yourselves from the other 79 resumes that a hiring manager might receive? You know, the purpose of resume is also to showcase your experience as well as your education, you know, as long as obviously it's going to be relevant to the type of role that you're applying to, and presenting skills in a standardized format. A lot of you guys by now may have, you know, Googled how to write a resume or resume examples. They all pretty much look the same. And so that's the goal, is to make sure that you're presenting a resume, you know, that fits in the North American resume format and the expectation of what that should really look like. The resume ultimately is there to give detail, you know, highlighting the value that you're really going to be able to add and that you've brought to your present as well as past employers, because these are the transferable skills that are going to pique the hiring manager's interest and, you know, potentially bring you in for that in-person interview. You know, it's going to detail things like your skills, your training, you know, your work experience, education, and most importantly, the accomplishments you've made within the past employer. So we're going to chat a little bit later on during this presentation about how you can really do that, but that's definitely something to keep in mind as you're going and writing your resume. The resume should also inform the employer of your career objective, you know, the job that you're seeking, and communicate in a very concise manner the benefits you're going to bring to the job if hired. So, you know, at the very top of the resume, okay, one hen's goal objective is to get a role as a cybersecurity analyst with ABC firm due to these specific reasons. And so that should all be relevant and tailored to the specific job that you're going to be applying to. And that's something we're going to chat a little bit about later on in the presentation. And ultimately, the purpose of a resume is to land you an interview, get you in front of the hiring manager to potentially get you that offer. And I think on to Tanisha to chat a little bit about actually the different types of resumes that you may or may not know about.
Right. So like Gwen said, the goal is to try to differentiate yourself between other people. So we realize that people may have different situations that they're coming from. So based on that, you may have different types of resume. So there are actually 4 types of resumes that are really based on your profession. So the one that people typically see is called the chronological one. That's where your work history is listed in order according to date, and you list, you know, I did this position for these years, I did this position before that for those years. And it is generally the preferred way that employers tend to see your experience. That's good for if you been working, for example, in the same industry, that you've got the same type of work experience. You'll want to put your resume in a chronological resume. So the second type of resume is called a functional. So a functional resume focuses more on your skills and your experiences. So if you're, for example, changing industries, for example, you're a project manager in a healthcare setting and you're trying to go, into project manager within cyber, you still have you still have project management skills within, that you can use and you can represent, but you may want to represent those in a functional means as opposed to chronological, just so you can highlight the skills that you're bringing to the organization. It's not like you're coming directly out of school and you don't have experience. You have that work experience is just in a different industry. So a functional resume is really going to focus on your skills and experiences as opposed to, beginning and end dates and chronological things. It also de-emphasizes your work experiences. So in this case, your history is really second to your abilities. The point is to point out, what it is that you're really good at. What is the value that you're adding to the organization? What is it that, you could bring to the organization? You're bringing, for example, 5 years of project management skills, or you're bringing 5 years of customer facing skills, whatever it is, that the job is calling for, you want to point those out in a functional resume. And this is also good if you've had lapses in employment. For example, if you took some time off to travel, or if you had a child, a functional resume may be a good way to represent that work so that you're not, for example, broadcasting, large gaps of where you weren't employed. All right, so the next two types are kind of the same type of thing, but just looked at it a little bit differently. So the first one is combination. So a combination is a hybrid of the chronological and the functional, and it highlights both your skills and your traits. Okay, so this is a good opportunity for you to, for example, point out the skills that you have that are relevant to the organization, but then also be able to, show that you've got a solid work history. So that's what a combination resume is. And then there's the targeted. So the targeted resume is what, I would advise a lot of people to do, because it's customized specifically to the position that you want. So in the example that Wynn used, she said, this is my resume. I'm applying for XYZ corporation. I'm applying for XYZ job. And, you guys are looking for these specific skills, which I've demonstrated throughout my work history. So it's very specific to the position that you are applying for. So this says, hey, I really want to come work here, and I'm targeting this resume specifically to you, as opposed to just a generic resume that you send out, for example, all of your cybersecurity analyst positions or all of your help desk positions or whatever it is that you're applying to. And so this is also perfect if you're considering career changes. So, a lot of people, are trying to get into cybersecurity, are coming from another industry. So you may be coming from banking, you may be coming from healthcare, whatever it is, you want to make sure that you're identifying your transferable skills. Okay. You don't have to go into cybersecurity as, for example, a new hire or an entry-level person, especially if you have, years of experience just in another field. So you want to make sure that you identify, for example, the skills that are relevant to what it is that you're trying to do within cybersecurity. So if that's customer-facing skills, if that's hands-on skills, if that's, risk management skills, or if that's policy skills, whatever your skills are that you are bringing from another industry into cybersecurity, you want to make sure that you identify those. You also want to make sure that you have a resume objective. So if your resume objective doesn't say, for example, that you're looking for a cybersecurity job, but all of your experience, for example, is in healthcare, you're going to get a lot of people who are reaching out to you for healthcare related jobs. It's important that you reframe your resume and make sure that it shows and reflects the works that you have that are transferable to the other jobs, so that they can see that you've got skills to be able to do that type of work. That's why it's also important to make sure that you add a skills section. And you also want to make sure that you carefully consider your resume format choices, because a very busy resume, as Wynn was saying, you may only get a few minutes, if that, in front of a hiring manager if your resume gets past the ATS. So you want to make sure that the information is available in an easily viewable manner, and then you omit unnecessary information. It's also important that you are very careful about acronyms and jargons that you use that are from other industries that may not mean anything, for a cybersecurity hiring manager who's looking at your resume. So, if you had certain things that mean something, for example, in sales, or if it means something in in your nursing career, you want to make sure that you spell out, the implications for that so that the hiring manager within cybersecurity can understand what it is you're doing. And then also, as far as your transitional periods, there's definitely some things that you can do to try to, say what you did during that time. You could set up, for example, a home lab. You can say, what courses you may have been looking at, or any training that you may be doing. There's a lot of different ways to, reflect periods of transition within your career to show that you are, passionate about your next career in cybersecurity.
All right, and on to resume best practices. So number one, keep it professional. So take out any slang or short forms that you may have in your resume right now. Like Tanisha mentioned, you don't want really any non-cyber specific industry terms or jargon that are bringing in from other industries. If there are, let's say, certifications like the CISSP, I would spell it out first, and then in brackets throw in the short form, and then you can continue that short form throughout the rest of your profile, because ultimately you need to keep in mind who the audience is that's going to be viewing your resume. The first person or first, individual that's going to be viewing your resume may not be someone with cybersecurity experience. So if you're throwing in CISSP, you're making the assumption that they may understand what that means without really knowing what that means, and without making sure that they know really what that means. The second one is no grammar or spelling mistakes. This is one I see a lot, and I think this is probably the easiest one to fix. Make sure you're using things like spell check and proofreading, do yourself, ask others to read it over for you, because ultimately grammar and spelling mistakes are probably one of the biggest red flags that managers do see. It's super easy to fix. So the fact that you have it there, okay, how much time and effort did this person really put into, writing their resume and making sure it was presentable? And chances are the role you're applying to is probably going to require some type of written experience as well, in writing emails or presentations or documents. So if the resume is the first thing they see and it's littered with spelling and grammar mistakes, that's also not the best first impression that you're making on them. On the tenses side, a resume should always be kind of a work in progress. So as you're making the necessary changes and updates to your resume from, in the actual body of your resume, make sure you're also making the necessary verb changes. So instead of presents, change it to presented if it was a past job. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. The next one is kind of keep it brief and remove irrelevant things. So one of my personal pet peeves is kind of having references available upon request at the end of the interview or at the end of your resume. I think the assumption nowadays is if you're going to progress to the offer stage, references are something that's going to need to be given no matter what. By you showing your willingness to provide references, I don't think that really makes an impact from a hiring manager deciding to actually interview you or not. That's not generally a red flag to look at, and that gives you a couple extra lines as well. If you're short on space, studies do show that hiring managers are going to be reviewing resumes for about 30 to 60 seconds before they make that go or no go decision, which is kind of crazy, but if they're looking at 80 resumes, they do kind of have to be as efficient as possible. So you also want to make sure that you're highlighting the most important things at the top of your resume, like Tanisha mentioned, the resume objective, as well as the relevant certifications, experience, and skills that you might have. For those with a significant amount of work and volunteer experience, you probably also want to remove some of the irrelevant older experience you have. For example, if you were a dog walker from 2001 to 2002, probably don't want that in your resume. And yes, that has been something I've seen before. The next thing you want to do is be very specific with your skills. So when you're writing your resume, you don't want to just add in the job description for the role that you're currently working in. You want to actually talk about the transferable and skills that you brought to the role that are highlighted by the role, and ultimately highlighting what makes you such a great asset and contributor to the team. The next one is, using action verbs. I see this a lot when I'm reviewing resumes as well, and I was definitely guilty of this. When I first started writing my resume, I ended up with 10 or 15 points of responsible for da 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 da. So if you actually Google this, Googling action verbs on resumes, there's a ton of lists and articles out there that can give you a better idea of what to put instead of responsible for. This is actually especially important in cybersecurity because managers don't really want people that are passive in their roles, just waiting for something to happen. They want people who are going to be proactive, who are going to take that initiative and take that ownership to make sure that the organization is as safe as possible. Obviously relevant here, we're applying to a cybersecurity role. So just some examples, if you're responsible for, let's say, putting together research on a particular subject, use words like assembled or analyzed. If you're responsible for bringing a project to life, use words like implemented, launched, spearheaded. If you're responsible for increasing sales, customer service levels, etc., use words like capitalized on and generated. And then if you're responsible for things like working with other teams, partnered would be a good one as well. The next point is obviously highlighting numbers as well as impact. Again, you don't want to just throw in a job description in your resume and call it a day. You want to be able to highlight the actual impact you've made in that role. And then the numbers are, add the numbers where they're going to be relevant. Obviously very relevant if you're, applying to some type of sales role, talking about the increase in sales and revenue that you've been able to bring to your current company. If you're applying to even roles where there's customer service, you can even talk about, the increase in the amount of positive feedback that you've received in this particular role. The next piece is keeping in mind strong visual representation, things like graphics, borders, profile pictures. The traditional North American resume format doesn't really have the profile pictures, and depending on how you're applying and sending in your resume as well, if you have fancy borders and graphics, that might all get jumbled up. So, it's best to kind of keep it as simple as possible. The last piece, especially considering we're in cybersecurity, you want to really identify what personal information is 100% necessary. So I've seen a lot of resumes where people actually have their home addresses in their resumes. This is probably something just from a security perspective isn't relevant. At the beginning of the chat, we were just throwing in city and state, and I think that's perfectly fine for a resume as well. So you don't need to put in your home address. And then the last piece is kind of tailoring your resume. You want to, tailoring your resume, I think we've had some questions in the Q&A as well. It does seem like a very big time investment. Every single time you apply for a job, you have to tailor your resume. It's like, oh, why not just send in the same one over and over and over again? It's because ultimately companies, even if you're applying for the same type of role, whether that's a project manager in cyber or an end user support role or a cybersecurity analyst, they are still looking for different skills and maybe different experiences with technologies. So you want to ensure that you're highlighting the relevant ones for that specific job. One of the suggestions I've made is to make a huge master resume with all of your experience at the front end. So it's a very high front end investment. And then you just kind of delete all of the irrelevant stuff and do a minor bit of tailoring when you're applying for roles. So again, we're going to have one-on-one sessions, and this is definitely something we can discuss and give you a little bit more specific feedback in during those one-on-one sessions. I think Tanisha now is going to chat a little bit about the ATS.
All right, so the applicant tracking system is pretty much the system that Human Resources uses to be able to screen applicants for a job. So what happens is that they get your resume, and like Wynn was saying, this may be one of 80 resumes that they're seeing for this particular job. So the ATS systems are meant to try to make it easier for the recruiters to be able to whittle down that list from 80 to something that's more manageable for the hiring manager to be able to look at. So what they're looking for essentially is keywords. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that your resume just highlights exactly what it is that the job is looking for. So on the previous slide, we were talking about, tailoring your resume. So you want to make sure that, whatever experience that the job says that you need, that you're including that information specifically in your resume. You're identifying that specific information. So they say, for example, you need 5 to 7 years. You want to make sure that, your resume highlights that. If it says that you need, for example, experience with a certain tool or a certain technology, you'll want to indicate that, in your resume, at all the different times that you use that tool within the course of your work, or for example, within your home lab or something like that, right? So you want to make sure that, you are highlighting all of the things that they're looking for, because when they go through the ATS, it's not going to be a person who's doing the initial screening of your resume. It's going to be the system. Okay. So this is also important if you have, for example, knockout questions. So if they say you must have a master's degree, or you must have, 5 years of experience in this, or you must have, they say something that is a requirement and your resume doesn't mention it, then that could be something that just eliminates you from consideration immediately. You're not going to get a thorough screening from the hiring manager when they have 80 people to consider for the position. Okay. So you want to make sure that you specifically answered whatever questions that they asked, and because those questions are basically used to either flag or accept an applicant. Okay, so they're literally looking for keywords. Okay, So you want to make sure that if nothing else, that you identify the keywords. I've seen some people, for example, highlight keywords, like bold them on their resume. That's something that you could do, but I don't think that that's going to make a difference within that applicant tracking system, because it's just basically scanning your resume. That's another reason why you want to make sure that your resume is in a format that is easily readable, because, for example, if you've got crazy borders or graphics that get messed up in the rendering when they maybe put it into an HTML format to read it, then that might mess up the computer's ability to be able to scan your resume. So you want to try to have a resume that's as simple as possible, that highlights whatever it is that the job is looking for. So how do you get past the ATS? Okay, you want to make sure that you're applying for roles based on your transferable skills and your relevant abilities. Okay, so for example, you don't want to apply for a job as a SOC analyst, for example, if you've never had a senior SOC analyst, if you've never had any experience within SOC analytics. You want to make sure that your resume highlights the transferable skills, okay? So that they can see how it is that you are qualified to do this job. If your qualifications or your experience is not necessarily within the job, for example, let's say it's within volunteer work, or it's within like a home lab, for example, or outside of work, you want to make sure that you identify that information so that they can see that you've got the skills that are relevant to what it is they're looking for. You also want to make sure that you're limiting the number of applications that you're applying to a singular company, right? Just because you see, for example, 15 jobs that are open at Amazon that look like you might be a good fit for doesn't mean that you necessarily want to apply to all 15 of those jobs. Okay, you want to apply for the jobs that you're specifically qualified for, and that you think that you'll be able to add value to that job. Because if you apply to a lot of them, it's going, and especially if those jobs are very varying in terms of their duties, it's going to look like you just shooting your shot and just sending your resume everywhere. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're using the right keywords from the job posting, not necessarily jargon, but specifically the way that they refer to it. So if you work for a different company and they refer to it in a different way, you want to make sure that you reference it in a way that the company you're applying for is looking for. So as much as possible, paraphrase from the job description. Use the job requisition as to fill out your resume. You can use that same language. You're not going to say, hey, you plagiarized us. No, this is me reflecting the work that I have done in my positions in language that you can understand, because it's the same language that you use for the job requisition. Okay, and you also want to make sure that if there are specific directions as far as the file type, like if they say that they want a Word document, or if they say that they want a PDF, that you give them the file type that you want. Just because you've got a pretty cool PDF version, if they say that they want a doc, actually send them a doc. Make sure that your resume looks appropriate, when it's converted from PDF to doc, or vice versa. And then also confirm, what the job rec is actually looking for. So if they give you something specific or give you specific directions, the quickest way to disqualify yourself is to not follow those directions. And you also want to make sure, finally, that you are limiting formatting options. So like Wynn was saying, you don't want to necessarily put your picture on there. You don't need, for example, a QR code if it's going through an ATS. That will be great if you're handing your resume to a person, for example, at a job fair maybe. But you want to make sure that you limit as much as possible tables, text boxes, logos, images, anything that's not going to be able to be parsable when they put your application through, especially if you're submitting it electronically. And you want to make sure that you're not just, submitting a generic resume. I'm not going to send my help desk resume to every job, even if they're calling, the position something else. I'm still sending them my help desk because it's closest to what it is that they're looking for. Make sure you're taking the time to tailor your resume.
All right. And then so, Tanisha just kind of covered, okay, how do you get a tailored resume past an ATS? Now we're going to chat really briefly about how to get your resume past a hiring manager. So the goal in this case of tailoring your resume is to pique their interest enough to be like, hey, I want to meet this person. I think this is someone that I'd like to sit down with and really have a conversation with. Obviously, from a tailoring perspective, how you go about it is going to be very different depending if you're coming from, a position and a career from a non-cyber background versus if you have some cyber experience already and in what areas. And so that's going to be dependent on, obviously your experience. So number one you want to do is you want to highlight those relevant examples. So for example, if a job description for a cybersecurity analyst says that they're going to be responsible for creating processes and regulations in order to keep the organization as safe as possible. Even though you don't have cybersecurity experience, you could put how you developed and implemented processes around ensuring, patient safety. If you were a project manager at a hospital, or, implemented processes on improving customer service quality if you were in retail or in end user support. So keep in mind, the transferable skills and what you've accomplished in your previous roles that are going to be relevant to the role that you're going to be applying to. You always want to make sure that you're speaking to the value that you're going to bring to the position. So why do they want to choose you, and why do they want to meet you over the other candidates that are applying? And it, again, ties back into highlighting the relevant experience that you have. You do want to illustrate your grasp of the organizational picture as well, especially within cybersecurity. It is all about the bigger picture of keeping the organization or the organization's clients safe. So can you really look past, your responsibilities in your current role to understand the bigger impact you make on the business as a whole, and highlight whether you've done that in the past? So these are just some things, you want to make sure you're highlighting on your resume in order to pique the hiring manager's interests. And after all this, hopefully you've done a great job getting your resume past the ATS. The manager seeing your resume, they're like, oh yes, I want to meet this person. I want to bring them in for an interview. And now you've received the interview request. As Kevin mentioned, we will have one-on-one sessions where we can probably give you some more specific feedback on what you can actually do to make the specific changes. And I think there's going to be a link that's going to be sent out after. But yeah, overall, this is a really quick overview of resume writing best practices. And now we're going to open up to questions and answers.
So we'll turn it over. We have at least 13 questions in our chat box, and we're going to turn it over to Jerry to moderate for that. So off to you, Jerry.
Thank you, Kevin. So thank you, everybody, for all of the questions that you've submitted throughout this presentation. And to Wen and Tanisha, I think one of the questions that seems to have gotten the most likes so far, and I think is most, pretty relevant to what we were having this presentation for, is it comes from a manual. My educational background and work experience doesn't relate to the tech and cybersecurity world. So obviously there's a lot of people on here that, would be looking to make a big career change. What type of resume would we recommend, Tanisha or Wen, for this type of transition? Would it be how would you target that resume for someone in their role?
So I would suggest a functional resume, just so you can be able to, say the skills that you have that are transferable. So, the way that you format your resume, I think should highlight what your strengths are. So like, for example, if your education is your strength and it's mostly related to what it is that you're applying for, you would want to make sure that you include that, first after your summary. But if your skills, for example, maybe in your volunteer experience or your home lab experience, or something else, maybe your work experience is more valuable and applicable to what it is that you're applying for, I'd suggest that you lead with that work experience and then maybe include some of your education later in the resume, just so that you're putting your best foot forward. So I definitely suggest a functional resume, and that you reframe it so that they can see the experience that you've brought from the other industry, to be able to, that'll be applicable to them, the value that you've added. So like if you were doing sales, you had 10% year over year, or whatever that looks like, whatever those numbers are, you had a 50% growth in your department that you manage, or a reduction of whatever, you want to make sure that you're highlighting those values, so that they can see the value that you added to your previous organization, but they can also see, for example, that you've got, at least some home lab experience, or at least some, skills or training or something that, will qualify you for this position within cyber.
So if I can jump in just real quick before you finish that one up, Jerry. On that same note, for Emmanuel, I did actually make a major transition over the course of some time as well, coming from the logistic environment back into IT or cybersecurity. One of the things that I did not realize during that transition were a lot of the skills that I had still translate. So you're from a management and program management standpoint, there's a lot of that analytics play a big part in IT and security. So really looking at what you do from a different point of view or different vantage point will help you to really tailor your resume and your product offering to a potential employer. So I do encourage you to take advantage of the one-on-ones, and let's talk through your resume from a career changers standpoint, or reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'll be more than happy to kind of talk you through that transition process as well.
Thank you, Kevin. So to go with from a different angle, we have a question here from Jade for folks that are currently in cybersecurity but are looking to break into management roles. Obviously, that is tough, and they were asking some questions around adding leadership roles from nonprofit organizations like extracurriculars. Obviously, that's one way, to show that management capabilities. But they were asking specifically about, what if you own a business, these type of things. Really, I guess if you haven't had a management role previously, what would you suggest is a good way to highlight your capabilities in that area?
That might be one for me. I too am a serial entrepreneur who's transitioned heavily into cybersecurity over the course of the last few years. And one of the things that has worked for me, one thing that you can do is, partner mentorships opportunities are always abounding. Your volunteer work does help. But like we said before, it's how you frame your resume and how you speak to your management skills. So addressing it from the standpoint of, as a manager or as an individual business owner, I had to deal with this particular issue or deal with this particular aspect of management for this many years, or breaking it down in a way that actually transfer that information either from a functional or chronological method to say, what you've been doing, how you've led people, how you've managed folks will help to get you at least into the conversation. I welcome any of the input from the other ladies, but I definitely have had success at that process as well.
Yeah, I would also add to that, when Kevin introduced himself, one of the positions that he, pointed out was that he is the chair for the career placement committee within Icmcp, right? So that speaks to his, even if he didn't have any other experience, which he does, but that at least speaks to his ability to manage projects, to be able to, organize events, to be able to do things within the space. So, even if he did not have that same work experience, within his actual job, you still can show that you're able to do that type of work. So it's important that even if you are not able to get a job, currently in the field that you're trying to get into, there are a lot of great volunteer organizations, like Icmcp, that you can volunteer to get leadership experience so that you can be able to have that work reflected on your resume. No one's going to look down on your resume because, that work is gained, for example, in a volunteer corporation versus, a private for paid corporation. It still shows your ability to deliver value to an organization, to be able to perform those tasks, and to be able to show, what it is that you're capable of.
Thank you, Tanisha, and thank you, Kevin. The one other thing I will just add to that as well, with my experience as kind of a serial entrepreneur, as well as Kevin had mentioned, is depending on exactly what role you're looking for, I would be careful in terms of other businesses that you might own or be running, because I've heard in the past, some hiring managers tend to wonder if, you're going to be with the company long term, or if this is really just a way to, make ends meet, so to speak, while your business is really your passion. So definitely something we could talk about more in the one-on-ones, but I would agree with the, the volunteer work and all of that is really obviously a great way to highlight it if you don't. Moving on, looks like we have a question from Emmanuel that has also gotten a number of likes. So his question was, should we ignore applying for jobs that require years of work experience that you don't have?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I think it's unfortunate because it's yes and no. I think it really depends on the type of job you're really looking to apply to. So, for example, if you're looking to apply, for a senior, security cloud architect role, and you don't have any experience in cloud or architecture or in cybersecurity, that's probably not going to be the role that's going to be the best fit for you, because there's some specific like hard skills, with those specific technologies that they are looking for. However, let's say, you're applying for, either more junior roles or more functional roles, such as a business analyst or a project manager, that type of functional experience, you're going to be able to find that relevant experience in other roles you may have. So that's just something to keep in mind. Unfortunately, it's not a yes or no. It's kind of it depends, and it really is going to depend on the role you're looking to apply to and how flexible they may be traditionally in hiring people without that level of experience, and then also your current level of experience and where you worked with in the past.
I think I'd also add to that if the job, for example, requires 5 to 7 years and you've got maybe 3 to 4 years, that that wouldn't be a deterrent for me to apply for the job, because you've still got a significant amount of experience doing that type of work. So just because it says 5 to 7, that might just be a nice to have. But if you can show that you've got demonstrated experience for 3 to 4 years, I would still apply for that job, even though you're not hitting the exact numbers that they want you to have. So, but I definitely agree with Wynn that it's really a yes or no or it depends type of answer.
Thank you very much. So it looks like as well, we're having a couple of questions here in terms of tools and listing on resume in terms of and certifications. We could probably combine those. What would you recommend in terms of the how would they list well, first of all, would it be good to list the tools and technologies that they are familiar with? And if so, how would they do that? And you could also combine that, I think, with certifications. Would you put them out, spell them out, and if so, how would you put that on a resume?
Sure. So I think in my opinion and what I've seen on resumes from a certification perspective, definitely throw it next to your name. You can highlight it in a certifications and education area on your resume. The certifications that you want to highlight, if you want it at the front or at the bottom, it's obviously also going to depend on the role you're applying to. If one of the qualifications for the role you're applying to is must have a CISSP or CISM or CISA, for example, and you have, let's say, all three, then I would definitely make sure that's highlighted at the top of your resume. But if you're applying for, let's say like a project management role that's in cybersecurity, I think it's still good that you have that, showing you have that technical background, but it's maybe a little bit less important to highlight that at the very, very beginning, because like we mentioned, hiring manager is really only going to be looking at your resume for 30, maybe 60, maybe a little bit longer seconds. So you just want to make sure you're highlighting the most important stuff at the beginning. From the tools perspective, I've seen definitely, areas of expertise, and then you list firewalls, then you list checkpoint, Palo Alto, FortiGate, and then all of these firewall technologies, and then load balancers, F5. The thing with that type of, that type of area on your resume is sometimes I'll actually sit down with someone. They'll be like, "Oh, great, you have Palo Alto experience. Tell me a little bit about that." And they're like, "Oh, I've actually never really worked on it. It was just in a lab environment, or I read a thing and I just decided to put it in the resume." So if you're going to have an areas of technical expertise on your resume, make sure it's actually with technologies you have strong hands-on experience with, whether that is 6 months or X number of years. Maybe put even the 1+ years or 3+ years or 5+ years of experience with firewalls. The other thing from a tool perspective is you also want to make sure that's listed not only at the top in the areas of expertise, but also in the body of your resume. So if you're applying for a role, the cybersecurity analyst, and it says in the job description that they want someone with, Splunk experience, don't just put, worked on SIM, et cetera, in the body of your resume. No, specifically say worked with Splunk in this particular manner, doing these specific things. So just that's where I would also make sure you're highlighting the relevant technologies within your resume.
Yeah, I would also add to that you may have a lot more certifications, a lot more education, for example, than you would put on your resume, right? So you only want to put the things on your resume that are relevant. So I've got 10 different industry related certifications, but if they're not related to the job that I'm directly applying for, they're not adding value to my resume. They're not helping someone to decide, whether or not to choose me versus someone else. So you want to make sure that if you're including tools or certifications or whatever it is, or even degrees, if they're not relevant to what it is that you are applying for and you've got other options, then you want to make sure that you're including those. So for example, I've got a master's in healthcare, right? And I've also got one in cybersecurity and digital forensics. So if I'm applying for a cybersecurity job, I'm going to probably include maybe either the cybersecurity or a digital forensics master's, and not include my healthcare one, right? Because it's not that I want to say, hey, it's not that I don't have this additional education. It's just that it's not relevant to this particular position. Okay, so you want to just put the minimum amount of information that's necessary to show that you're qualified for the position, and the same thing for the certification. So they're like Wynn was saying, if they're calling out specifically that they want a CISSP, make sure that within your certification section, you say I have a CISSP, and make sure that you are, if you're using, for example, doing things within the domains within CISSP, that they're, you're spelling that out within the text of your resume. But, for example, if you've got, one for something completely off related, then you might not want to include it. Like maybe they don't care that you've got like a PMP or risk management certification if what it is that you're applying for is something, completely different, outside of, or maybe more technical and not like in management or something like that. So you just want to make sure that you're only giving the information that's going to add value to your resume, not just take up space.
Thank you all. And how do we feel about acronyms in terms of the tools and or certifications? Do we have any recommendation in terms of, like, say, for example, CISSP? Are we just putting that on the resumes? Or are we actually spelling that out? Or does it even matter?
Yeah, I think it definitely matters, especially considering, sometimes the ATS or, someone in HR is reviewing your resume, they might not know what a CISSP is because they're looking at the job description and CISSP is spelled out. I don't know exactly what it is, or else I would tell you guys, but that's kind of the idea. So if you have these short forms, my suggestion is obviously, have CISSP, after your name or highlight, but then definitely write in the full, what that short form stands for. And then in brackets, put CISSP, and then you can use that short form moving forward, but you just need to make clear what that short form actually stands for before you decide to throw it into your resume.
Thank you, Wen. Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. The people that are looking at your resume is not always familiar with the technologies you think they are. So we have another question from can we elaborate on what we mean when we're talking about a home lab environment and that being kind of important? Maybe Tanisha and or Kevin?
Yeah, so when we talk about a home lab, what we're talking about is that you've set up an environment within your home, like, for example, like a type 2 hypervisor like VirtualBox or VMware, where you've set up VMs so that you can be able to do things within there. So a lot of the things that, I talk to people about ethical hacking, right? So we'll set up a simulated lab environment that has maybe 3 or 4 VMs in it that you can then do, the ethical hacking activities on and not have to worry about the risk of, legal exposure or, just, accessing something that you shouldn't be, right? So it sets up a sanitized environment for you. Okay, so those skills, that you're learning in there, you could learn, for example, web application security, you can learn ethical hacking, penetration testing. There are a lot of different skills that you can get from that home lab, which are valuable, especially if you're applying to those type of jobs. You could also do, for example, set up a blue team like home lab where you're actually just monitoring your network security and being able to parse the logs and be able to, identify, events that are happening on your device. So if you don't have any actual work experience at your job within those areas, you could use a section, that talks about your home lab to talk about those, to show that you've got experience, to show that you've got, I've used Wireshark, I've used Splunk, I've used, Nmap, or whatever the tools that you're using within that home lab, so that you can make sure that someone can see, hey, I might have been in healthcare, but, I've also been doing things to, further my career in cybersecurity.
That is absolutely correct. I'll piggyback on top of that as well, just to say that you'll find that a lot of employers are moving more toward your ability to do a job versus your education or certifications behind it. So highlighting that information, the work you've done in your home lab, will actually help you in the interview process to be able to speak to a lot of what the requirements are for the job experience. And so what you're trying to do is really let them know, look, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to grow, I have a passion and a hunger to do this work. And that will get you a lot further than you may think. I actually had that experience recently with Microsoft here in the Atlanta area. They are doing the same thing, and so that is definitely a viable approach.
Thank you all. So this will be our last question and answer. We will get back to everybody's other questions after this event, so don't worry about that. But the last question here I wanted to ask the panel was around from Carmen. Do I place a year degree completed on the resume, example 2015, or do I leave off my years at my current employment as to not show my age? So in general, I think the question is, when you don't want to necessarily highlight your age in the resume, what figures are we putting in, and what maybe are we leaving off?
So me personally, I don't include the years that I, for example, graduated on my resume. That the reason being is that, if I tell you, for example, that I graduated in, this year, then you can start doing some math and say, okay, well, that makes her, around some age that I'm not willing to admit to, right? So for me, I don't put that information. As far as your jobs that you're actually working, you want to actually let them know, for example, I did this for a year, or I did this for 2 years. You want to include those, especially if you're doing a chronological resume. But I think that as far as like knowing that I graduated in 2000 and then, I did this in 2004, and, so that I don't think that is necessarily necessary. If you apply, for example, for a government job and they need a detailed chronological history for the past, 10 or 15 years or whatever it is, then you can, as Wynn was saying, if you have that one master resume that has all of that stuff in there, including the stuff that's not relevant, then you can include that. But otherwise, I don't think that it's necessary to put the year of completion, unless that degree is currently in progress and you have not completed it yet. So to not put a date when you haven't completed it makes it seem like you already have the degree, which you don't, which I think is not being honest. So
yeah, and that's also the same for in progress certifications as well. So I know for a lot of like the CCIE, for example, there's a lab portion and then there's the written portion. If you've only completed the written portion, you still have to do the lab portion, then I would put it in as in progress versus just making the assumption that, okay, this person has their full CCIE. That's good.
Thank you.
All right. Well, team, thank you very much. That is our time for today. I just want to briefly kind of share with you a little bit about Icmcp and what we're trying to do. Some of the benefits of being a member of Icmcp are some online skills assessments. We do have some scholarships available that have been made available by our sponsorships. We have cybersecurity internships and career opportunities on our Icmcp job board. We do have cybersecurity training at deeply discounted pricing for Icmcp from or through our Icmcp training partners, which does include SANS. We do have a mentorship program where we have career guidance from cybersecurity experts. We do have some networking at ICMCP through the village, and our goal is really to push or help people enter into our event, our organization. This is just our upcoming events on the right. We do have interviewing tips and tricks coming up in April, on April 15th. We will have a social media workshop, which will be focusing on how you can tailor your social media presence to better land the job that you're looking for. We will have a fireside chat, which the theme is a day in the life of a cybersecurity professional or practitioner. And then we will have a networking for advancements in July of this year. Please stay tuned to the ICMP, stay tuned to our website, our LinkedIn page, follow us, and we will definitely continue to bring content to you all to help you through this time. And hopefully we'll get a chance to connect at the next event. With that being said, I thank you to our panelists for such great information. Thank you to our guests for bringing a part of our event, and we hope that we following this event, we will remind you that we will send out a link to you. Also, once you get off, there will be a brief 5-question feedback that we ask you to complete, so you can let us know how we're doing and give us your comments and your concerns or your opinion. So thank you very much. Have a great and blessed day, and stay safe.